Good evening. Broadcasting live from Peacock Alley this evening. This is Gary Eminent, running the controls with your host, Dale Wetzel. We got a busy night ahead of us, Dale. But
we do. We have three distinguished gentlemen with us. We're going to be talking about the issues of the day. And Gary, first of all, what sort of culinary delights do we have at the Peacock Alley this evening?
Well, tonight is political wing night, so we have left wings and right wings, and there's a difference between the left and right wings. I'm a right winger, and I'm sitting next to Eric here on the table, and we'll get to him a little bit later in the segment.
I understand that Eric is quite the left winger.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm sitting to his right, so we'll kind of, at least where I'm sitting anyway. But the difference between the left wings and the right wing is the left wings are breaded, so they're $5 tonight at Peacock Alley for 10 of them. I've already had 18 of them. I've had barbecue, salt and vinegar, and let me think, what's the other one? Barbecue, salt and vinegar.
How about Thai? Do you have any Thai peanut?
No, I didn't have Thai peanut. Oh, I had the regular spicy buffalo one, so that's what I had.
Okay, let's talk about this for a moment. Is Thai peanut a left wing or a right wing sauce?
I would make it a left wing.
Why is that?
Because from Thailand. I don't think they're very conservative. Well, they tend to be on the left side. So
because they're foreigners, so it's a left wing sauce. Okay.
Yeah, but the sauce is not what makes it. It's the breading. So.
But see, is it conservative to bread your chicken wings or to leave them naked?
I like them naked, and I'm a right winger, so that falls in line with my right wing little menu here.
Well, see, I think that you're wrong. I mean, I think that conservatives should bread their chicken.
And why would that be?
Because it has more cholesterol that way. I would think, and it has more calories too. Well, these are good, solid right wing values. I would think, wouldn't they be?
Well, I think less is more, and that's what a conservative is, and that's why I wouldn't put
breading on. Maybe they're libertarian wings.
That could be.
The naked ones? Okay.
Yeah, so anyway, tonight at Peacock Alley, where we're broadcasting live tonight, political wing night, 10 wings for $5. Come and eat all you want, and we're going to have a fun show tonight. And, Dale, you've been busy at the legislature today. Maybe you can give us a little bit of what happened today. You know,
the gentlemen at the table, I think they've witnessed a great deal of this, and it's quite interesting. First of all, let's talk about the Conservation Fund. Kelvin Hullet, who's with us tonight. First of all, let's introduce our guests because I'm going to be referring to them in my opening little spiel here. We have Kelvin Hullet, who's the president of the Bismarck Mandan Chamber of Commerce. We have Mr. John Godfread, who is a vice president at the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce. And we have Eric Aasmundstad, who is the former president of the North Dakota Farm Bureau, and still quite active in public affairs. And he was running around the Capitol today because there are lots of things he was interested in. And one of them was what's called a conservation fund. And this is something that Kelvin Hullet helped put together in the wake of a failed initiated measure last year. The group of conservation organizations drafted a initiated measure to essentially set aside a portion of the oil tax for a conservation fund, which would have been run by a 9-member appointed board. And this initiated measure didn't get off the ground because the organizers had the poor fortune or poor judgment to use a group of NDSU football players as their signature gatherers, and these young fellas didn't have the finer points of gathering signatures down, and so they were doing things like
that's putting it like
they were doing things like copying them out of phone books.
Yeah, it's called the white pages. In the
book. They were making up names, and eventually they were found out, and the petitions were disallowed, and the whole initiated measure essentially went down the tubes. Well, this was taken as an opportunity by some folks who thought, well, since this might even come up again, we might as well try to moderate it a bit, perhaps. And so the Bismarck Mandan Chamber was one of the organizations that essentially got all of the folks together who were interested in this, including the North Dakota Farm Bureau, the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, the other conservation organizations like Ducks Unlimited, and they all were meeting regularly since September to kind of hash out legislation which has been introduced, and it was included in the governor's budget message. And this bill would have a $30 million conservation fund. The original initiated measure, the amount of money that would have been controlled by this appointed board could have been $160 million per 2 years, or even greater than that, because it was linked to oil tax revenue, whereas the bill that was heard today by the House Natural Resources Committee, it's a fixed amount over 2 years, $30 million. And it would be, there would be recommendations made by an advisory board, which has a number of stakeholders as members. But the final decision on grants and how the money is spent goes to the State Industrial Commission, which is made up of the governor, Jack Dalrymple, the Attorney General, Wayne Stenjum, and the Agriculture Commissioner, Doug Goehring. Now, this is, it's thought to be a much better setup than the initiated measure because there's some political accountability there. You have elected officials who are calling the shots. And what was surprising about the hearing today is the gentleman for Ducks Unlimited, who was the leader of the initiated measure that did not go down the ballot. His name is Steve Adair. He came in and said, well, $30 million is nice over 2 years, but what we really want is $200 million. And so the folks on the Natural Resources Committee were a bit slack-jawed, I think, at that sort of number. And we'll see just how successful they are at wheedling that much of the green stuff out of the legislature.
Was the guy from Ducks Limited, what was his name again?
Steve Adair.
Was he from Nebraska? I was wondering if he's a hog farmer. Or
I
just has a
come
joke.
on,
Okay.
come on. I mean, the Ducks Unlimited does have a very nice building down by the Missouri River,
Very
so
nice.
I think that they're not hurting for cash. But I was thinking 200 million green ones is a lot of spread.
Yeah.
That's a lot of green. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of success they have at trying to bump up that $30 million number. I personally am not too optimistic they'll get anything close to $200 million. But we shall see.
Well, these three might have something to say about it.
Yeah, so I'm sure they'll have opinions about this. I've been prattling on just on this subject probably too long. Mr. Aasmundstad, let's talk about that fund, the conservation fund. Could you just talk about what you think about it as a policy and what you think about that bill?
Well, it's. When you looked at the group that was sitting around the table discussing these things, you really needed to take a picture. It's probably never going to happen again. It was probably the oddest group of folks that you could imagine never be sitting talking at the table about a common goal. The fund, I think you're exactly correct, Dale, in that the $30 million is a fixed number. We started out at 20, and I think our members, or we certainly, from the perspective of our board of directors and things, we're a lot more comfortable at 20 million than we are at 30, but we're a lot more comfortable at 30 than we are at 100. So you've got to
200.
You got to take it all in stride. It was a big job for our board of directors to allow us to even sit at the table. Mm-hmm. But I think what they come to see was the importance of the effort for many different reasons. And probably more than any of them is the political capital that we'd have had to burn if we were to oppose it. I mean, I'll be blunt about it. You can only do so many things. And when you see the leadership names on the bill, and the governor's mentioned it in both of his addresses, you get real attentive real quick and realize that this is a train that's going down the track, and you might as well get on it and try to make it something that you can ride rather than something that's going to run over you. So, and that's why we were there. And I think when we look at the state as a whole, maybe it is time that something is done along those lines. We're pretty comfortable that it's a 2-year. Like any legislative initiative, it lasts for 2 years and cannot be, it may or may not be renewed by a future legislature, and it's a whole lot more palatable to our folks than having it in something that's there forever because the people put it there.
Yeah, I thought of the $30 million as basically a test drive, and when they came in with $200 million, they want to take a test drive in a Lamborghini. It's quite interesting. Kelvin, you were as involved as anyone in this. What was it like to put this bill together?
It was really very interesting, and as Eric said, I think when I put out the first email and said to the groups, let's get together and have a conversation, I think some of them thought I was sort of joking. But once we got everybody in the room and started meeting weekly and really started to get into some engaged conversation, about what this could be and how it could work and what did the governance structure look like, all of those sorts of things, we were able to really craft what I would consider a compromise piece of legislation. Everybody had input into it. There were some very difficult issues that we worked through. Land acquisition took us 3 or 4 meetings to really work through and have the engaged conversation with all of the groups about how do they feel about that issue. The money was another issue, and I think, as we came out of the group, it was at $20 million. Obviously, the leadership has brought that up to $30 million. And so, as we look at the level of funding, I think there may be more discussion, but my suspicion is $30 million is the number that we'll see. But it's been a very interesting and engaging process, and, I'm a firm believer in that putting the parties in the room together that are all interested in the bill and see if you can work something out. And I think what we came out with was a legislative proposal that we believe is better than the constitutional amendment because, as Eric said, you have some time to look at it. But the other is everybody really has input into the process, not just in drafting the bill, but also on the advisory board. The way the advisory board is structured with 4 representatives from the ag community, 4 from the conservation community, 2 from energy, 1 from business, and 1 from parks and rec. You really have a group there that represents a broad spectrum of the conservation issue, from how do we use our working lands all the way down to do we put swing sets in a park. So I think that we've hopefully brought forward a piece of legislation that we can really work with and do some good things for conservation in North Dakota.
Could you talk for a moment about what the bill does? What would this fund be used for?
Sure. When we work through the bill, there's really 4 things that the bill can be used for. And that's to provide access to public and private lands for sportsmen, including projects that create fish and wildlife habitat. Water quality, improve and maintain water quality, soil conditions, animal systems, and support other practices of stewardship to enhance farming and ranching. That's our working lands provision. Develop, enhance, conserve, and restore wildlife and fish habitat on public and private lands. And then finally, conserve natural areas for recreation, development of parks and recreation areas, thus how do we save some of our scenic areas, those sorts of things.
John, what about the bill is particularly notable to the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce?
Well, I think just for a little background is that we were the principal organization that formed People First in North Dakota. We were the one that
you fought the initiated measure.
We were starting to rally.
You were ready to.
We were just garnering the support to fight the initiated measure. I think some of the concerns we had were the lack of governance under the measure. It was an unelected, basically an appointed board that'd be in charge of, on our projections, upwards of $200 million a year. If our oil production continues to go up and the taxes continue to go up, you're talking $1 billion in a decade. That's a lot of money. And then also, I think what the dollar amount is a big concern for us. The governance was another concern for us. So that's kind of how we got involved, is that we were the principal organization to kind of step in and say, whoa, let's take a look at this. Some of our calculations, even when they throw back the $200 million of biennium, you're looking at the 9th largest state agency in our state. That's a pretty I think when you look at our state and how we are relatively fiscally conservative and the things we spend money on show our priorities, and to all of a sudden bump this up into the ninth largest state agency, I think that'd be it'd be risky to say one thing. And so I think we've been interested just in that aspect in order to kind of help Kelvin along and help him, help get people to the table. And I would hope we've got some political clout as well that we can help maybe push and carry something through. And we're supportive of it, and we like what we've got now.
Do you think that this is part of a trend of, frankly, increased power on the Industrial Commission? I mean, the Industrial Commission's power has increased with the increase in oil production. I think it's fair to say, because their decisions on regulation and the rules of oil production become much more significant when you're dealing with such a huge industry. And now we would give them the final say over a conservation fund. What do you think about that, Mr. Aasmundstad?
Well, I think putting this charge to the Industrial Commission makes a lot of sense, because one of the things that we talked a lot about at different meetings we scattered about was, are we growing government? Mm-hmm. Are we going to create another bureaucracy to have to manage this money? The technical people exist within the Industrial Commission to carry that out without more FTEs, without another whole layer of bureaucracy. So that's why it ended up in the Industrial Commission. I wouldn't really characterize it as the power of the Industrial Commission growing. In fact, I'm not so sure they even really wanted it. We kind of just stuck it there because it made sense.
All right. So. You mentioned a couple of real concerns that you had going in to the drafting of this, and they had to do with whether or not the fund could be used to purchase land and the length of easements. Could you just describe what your concerns were along those lines?
Well, sure. We've had a long-standing policy in the Farm Bureau against perpetual easements. And aside from that, we also believe that the state of North Dakota, or government in general, probably owns all the land they need to own for now anyhow, or for forever. I guess the phrase we used was not one thin dime for 1 square inch in North Dakota, and we're probably okay with it. But the point we have to make, Dale, is that one of the greatest accomplishments in conservation for a generation anyway has been the CRP program. And we have to remind the conservation community that as great as that was, in their opinion and a lot of opinions, for wildlife conservation, they didn't own 1 acre of it. It was all land owned by farmers and ranchers throughout the state. And I think the point that needs to be made here is $30 million is a lot of money. And unless you're probably, I mean, there's people that, like we know they want 200, but $30 million is a lot of money. And if that can be used in concert with farmers and ranchers and other existing infrastructure, there's a lot of good that can be done with that money, much more good than just purchasing property.
Is part of the strategy here to essentially replicate CRP or have a North Dakota version of CRP?
I think there's people that wanted to see that happen. I don't believe this is enough money to do that. I think there's enough money here, plenty enough money, to target areas, to target specific conservation concerns. And I think, as you pointed out, Kelvin, there's an opportunity here to target the working lands, work with farmers and ranchers out on the land to make this program work and leverage this program into something that can work for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's right. And as we started this project, I mean, and actually this goes back to before the measure came off the ballot. We'd had meetings with some of the conservation groups and had some conversations about could we do this legislatively instead of a constitutional amendment. And when they met with our Government Affairs Committee, I mean, they made some pretty interesting points about, we've always had the ability to do conservation, but the money had always been put into the water projects. And, and our Government Affairs Committee said that's a very valid point, that we haven't put money into this. And with the changing face of our state, it really is something that we need to talk about, because I think we all value the land. I mean, we like our open skies, we like to hunt, we like to fish, we like to go on the rivers, I mean, all of those sorts of things. And so there really is a very valid discussion here to have about how do we proceed forward with this. And hopefully we've got a good piece of legislation that can do that. The conservation groups, as we went through this entire process, I mean, I give them credit. They have stayed true to their number. I mean, they've told us all along that they've thought 100 million was the number, and they told us they were going to bring the amendment in and have a conversation, and we said, yeah, that's perfectly valid. We understand you also have a constituency that you need to serve. So, so I think that we've had a really good conversation. My hope is that as we look at this and move forward, one of the things that we really will see is that you take 30 million and you turn it into 40 or 50 million with matching funds from other projects and people coming in. So we think there's a lot of possibility here to really do some great things, as Eric said, both from the public and the private sector, and really do some things for the people of North Dakota, because in the end, that's what this is all about. It is about access and those things that create quality of life for North Dakotans.
Do you think that there's been a certain amount of hyperbole, for want of a better term, to the debate? I'm thinking about the presentation that was made by Mr. Adair, the chairman of the initiated measure and a person for Ducks Unlimited. He was very passionate in talking about how we're losing our natural heritage, and that things are if we don't do something, we're going to lose North Dakota forever. I mean, I don't think I'm exaggerating too much. And I wondered if that was overstating the case a bit.
I'm not sure if it's overstating the case. I do think if you look at some of the facts and figures that Ducks Unlimited has and some of the conservation groups, and you look at the change that's occurring at the federal level and the fact that CRP and some of the other farm programs, are with the federal budget picture are going to change dramatically. I think they're looking at those things, and as they look at the future, I think that they are very concerned about how do we make sure that North Dakota maintains enough native prairie for duck nesting. All of those sorts of things that provide a value not just to us, but even to the nation. So, I think from their perspective, it is a very pressing and important issue.
Well, I think there's something to be said about that as well. I think there is some hyperbole maybe on both sides of this issue. The one thing that is kind of a neutral party who isn't involved necessarily in conservation or isn't involved in agriculture and some of these other things and relatively new to this game, the conservation side doesn't necessarily understand what the agriculture community is doing to conserve through working lands, through winter wheat and all these different programs that are good for agriculture. The farmers like them; they're doing them. But when you talk to the conservation people, they don't necessarily understand it. They don't know. Kind of the modern farming practices aren't really necessarily all the way there. And I think on the other side too that there's the CRP issue is we've talked about, and they're well aware of that. I think getting everybody into the room to say, hey, this is what we can. This is what we're doing. This is what we're already doing. This is how it's helping. You may not think that's necessarily conservation, but it's working. And here's some different avenues that we're happy with.
Well, the thing that always comes into my mind is that if you're not a conservationist as a farmer, then you're out of business in a couple of generations because you
absolutely.
So you have market incentives to be a conservationist,
and always have. Dale, you and I are old enough to know that. Remember driving across North Dakota in the wintertime and seeing black snowdrifts. Yeah. You don't see those anymore. Mm-hmm. That's part of conservation.
Mm-hmm. We're broadcasting live from Peacock Alley tonight. Our sponsors for this hour is the GNDC. John Godfread, Vice President of Government Affairs. We appreciate you helping host us this evening.
Enjoyed it.
When we come back from the break, we look forward to a new set of guests. And thanks for listening to us this evening as we broadcast from Peacock Alley. We're live at Peacock Alley. Thanks for joining us. Tonight is political wing night, so those of you that are out and about want to come on down and have some wings. We got the left wings and the right wings, and I think at the table we got a combination of all of the above. Don't you think, Dale?
I was thinking, yes, it's true. Do you prefer breaded or naked wings?
That's the question.
And what kind of sauce
that sounds like a loaded question if you ask me.
Yes. I don't even eat wings. I don't either. And with the commissioner, he doesn't fit either right or left. He's a statesman right down the middle of the road.
This is true. He's a middle wing.
There you go.
Sounds like a football position.
He's the center of the
He's the center, yeah.
So we had a good segment just before. Dale, you got some questions. You're going to be covering some interesting ground the next 30 minutes here, so I'm looking forward to the questions you asked our guest here. So you go ahead and introduce our guest and take her away.
Our guests here are Senator David O'Connell from Lansford. He was just reelected last year, and he's been in the House and the Senate. He is a former Democratic Senate leader, and he is a member of the Appropriations Committee. And he is a co-sponsor of the bill that we'll be talking about. It's everyone refers to it as the animal cruelty bill. It's actually the anti-animal cruelty bill. And we have the Agriculture Commissioner, Republican, Doug Goehring, and he helped to write the anti-cruelty bill. And we have Representative Corey Mock from Grand Forks, a Democrat. He was intimately involved, I think it's fair to say, in the writing of an anti-cruelty bill 2 years ago, and the bill has not been in the House yet, but he's very familiar with the subject. I thought he would add a bit of perspective to our discussion. First of all, Mr. Goehring, how does this bill change the law as we have it now?
Well, first of all, it does now employ a Class C felony when you have an act of cruelty towards an animal, which did not exist before. Before, we were operating with a Class A misdemeanor. So in those egregious acts, it actually does step up and implement a Class C felony, or as a court or a judge would see fit, you could be charged with a Class C felony based on the act. And I think what it really does is what the group has really worked on is they've adjusted the penalty to really reflect the severity of the crime.
And a Class C felony is 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. That's the maximum penalty.
Or both.
Yes.
Or both, yeah.
Senator O'Connell, you're from a rural district. Was this tough for you to sign on to? Because I imagine that maybe a lot of the farmer constituents might think there's not a lot of upside to this.
No, you're definitely right there. It's going to be a little heat no matter which way this one goes. But when I was out campaigning up on over 24,000 miles, and being there's a flood in every one of the three counties represented, there was a number of animals that were abandoned. You know, the shelters were full, and in Minot, and you know, people, when they see an abandoned animal, a dog, cat out on the farm, especially if you got little ones, you get pretty, you don't know if they got a disease or what. So a lot of these animals die of poison, lead poison. So, you know, looking at it, I talked with the commissioner, and the commissioner, you know, has spent almost 2 years, if I remember right. Almost three, putting this together. And after visiting with him, and he had all these groups put together today. I don't know how in the devil he did it. You know, when you get every farm group and every organization going, that's a compliment in itself. I've only heard one complaint, and that's on the felony charge on cruelty or abandonment so far. And that's unbelievable. You probably got a better heads up on what went on today than I do, because I testified. I went back and I tried to get in the hall even, and I couldn't even get close enough to hear what was going on, so I know you were in there. But before we get too serious, did you hear about the two silkworms that were in a race today?
No, I didn't hear about that. Could you tell me about that, please?
They ended up in a tie.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so.
See, I think it was Corey Mock's.
Maybe Corey. That's not where Corey or the commissioner.
The very loud and obnoxious yellow tie.
Oh, it's not loud or nor obnoxious.
It looks great. It looks good. Blue. I like it. Matches your sunflower.
Representative Mock, how did you get involved in this issue? You were quite involved in it 2 years ago.
Well, you know, in part, and I actually have to give tremendous accolades to the Commissioner's office and Commissioner Goehring and had many of his staff, as Senator O'Connell had pointed out. This was a group of ag producers and those who had a vested interest in seeing animals cared for, that's had to really wanted to have this law reworked in a way that clearly defined acts of cruelty and clearly said in statute what it meant to violate those statutes and the appropriate punishment for those. So for us, 2 years ago, I came in with the Commissioner's Office, Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, Stockmen's Association, the veterinarians, and then you even have those who work with the animal shelters. And my connection is a volunteer in our local shelter up in Grand Forks. You know, we just adopted a puppy about 3 months ago, and it's so I mean that's always exciting when you have a new little, in our case, a terrorist keeping us up at night is sort of how we look at her for these next couple of months.
I understand she's tearing up your house right now.
She is. In fact, you know, I hate to make light of such a serious subject, but you talk about animal cruelty. She's being cruel to us right now. It's I just saw the photo of the thing she's tearing up in our living room. But no, I worked on this issue 2 years ago because of the importance. And many constituents of mine, I live in a very urban area. Unlike Senator O'Connell, who put 24,000 miles on his car campaigning for a legislative race, I bet I walked 24,000 steps going door to door just in my contiguous district. So it's a big difference. We get a lot of the media from Minnesota and South Dakota, and we had heard a lot of stories of acts of cruelty. And the stories would come out in our newspapers and television and radio saying if that had happened in North Dakota, they would have walked away with virtually no penalty. And the one case that really brings to mind is the case where a cat was super glued to the side of a highway, all four paws and its nose, and it was left there to die. And someone recovered, and the cat lived. But you think of that, and you go, in North Dakota, that would have been, at worst, a misdemeanor. And that could have happened 3 or 4 times over and still would have been, at worst, a misdemeanor. So that really was, you know, a few phone calls and some concerned visits with constituents. And I had no choice but to want to get involved and help the cause as much as I can.
You know, and we did hear, too, some cases where abuse, where couples were breaking up, and I'm going to get even with you, you know, so all of a sudden the family pet or the girlfriend's pet is beaten or whatever. So we don't hear about that much in North Dakota, but in other states, you know, you hear more of that all the time.
You know, Dale, I appreciate the accolades and the recognition, and I certainly thank people for that, but I really have to commend the group that got together, the North Dakotans for Responsible Animal Care. It consisted of the North Dakota Stockmen's, North Dakota Farmers Union, North Dakota Farm Bureau, the Dakota Zoo. There was the Humane Societies, the local Humane Societies, pet shelters that were involved, and Dakota Zoo, the North Dakota Veterinary and Medical Association, my state vets, the Board of Animal Health, that really did a lot of work. They carried the water. They came to a consensus. They had a goal in mind, and they worked on that. And I commend them. I respect them, because when they got together, they were sensitive to the issue, and they really stayed focused on the ball. That doesn't mean to say that at times they digressed a bit, but you know what? That conversation was good because it brought out, again, those sensitivities that they were trying to deal with. And they did a very good job of drafting and bringing something together that first split off and looked at neglect, that looked at abandonment, and it looked at cruelty, and I treated them differently. And I think that was so important. I just played a role for a time in being a facilitator, and I know that Jason Schmidt ended up being the chairman of the group and followed through very well. They did a great job. They got out there and informed the public of what their intentions were. I support that wholeheartedly, and I appreciate all their hard work. I really can't say enough about all the good work and hard work they did, and they came together to really take on an issue that I know has been near and dear to many in North Dakota, but certainly was an issue, and it was a concern that was raised, and they've done a great job.
What were the sticky wickets here in terms of the toughest issues to get past in terms of reaching a consensus?
Well, I think some part of it came down to really at times remembering that you have animal agriculture and you have companion pets, and that there are exemptions, so to speak, for animal agriculture, customary practices, husbandry practices that exist in animal agriculture, and remembering that there's a different process also. Some people don't realize and understand that when you have an investigation that starts or a complaint that's raised, when you look at abuse, when you look at neglect, or you look at cruelty for a companion pet, you generally are involving the state's attorneys. You're looking at the law enforcement and probably even a local vet to work with you. And they are proceeding forward and doing the investigation. We're rarely involved. Sometimes we're actually called and we are involved. But I will tell you, in animal agriculture, there is no law enforcement department that will take on an issue until they actually call our office, our vets, or they're dealing with the local veterinarian, because they have to make sure they have a well-founded case before they take any action, because a judge would just slap them hard. And quite frankly, they can't risk that. We can't risk that. There's reputations out there, and there's people that need to be protected, because sometimes it's just misunderstood how you're caring and providing protection and care for an animal.
One of the things that is interesting about the bill is essentially there's 4 different categories. There's animal cruelty. Then there's animal abuse, which is mistreatment that does not rise to cruelty. You're not breaking the animal's bones. You're not, causing serious injuries. There's abandonment, and then there's neglect, and these are all treated differently in the law, the proposed law. Cruelty is a Class C felony right off the bat. It's 5 years up to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. The other 3, abuse, abandonment, and neglect, you still have a Class A misdemeanor, which is a year in jail and a $2,000 fine for the first offense. Yeah. The second offense, you have a felony. And during the hearing today, the Farm Bureau, which was one of the organizations that helped to write this bill, came in, and the president, Mr. Johannes, said, "We agree with the Class C felony, the first Class C felony for cruelty, but we don't agree that there should be a felony penalty for abuse, abandonment, or neglect." And my question is, I'll ask this of you first, Senator O'Connell, what do you think this will do to the bill's prospects the fact that the Farm Bureau, which is an influential organization, doesn't like this particular part of it.
Well, it's interesting you'd ask that question because I just talked with the Farm Bureau here about 15 minutes ago, and that's the first time I really heard about the concerns. I heard it on the floor and whatnot, and I don't. There would probably be amendment coming up. It'd be my guess, Commissioner. I don't know for sure, but you bring up an interesting point, Dale, and that's what I was going to bring up because we're bringing up the worst scenario start off because, like you say, lack of adequate care, can't even talk tonight, Class A misdemeanor, and then the second one within 5 years becomes a felon then.
Yes.
Animal abuse, Class A misdemeanor, Class C felon after within 5 years. Cruelty, just a class, I shouldn't say just, Class C a felony. Animal abandonment, Class A misdemeanor within 5 years, Class C felony. So, violation of a caged animal, that's a misdemeanor. So we have been talking about the worst case scenario. So I wanted to clear that up, Dale, and I appreciate you because people are going to feel that, hey, you're going to slap us in jail if we take and happen to trip over the cat on our way to work in the morning.
Yeah, that isn't how it is at all. I mean,
right.
if in order to be accused of a felony, you're going to have to deliberately harm an animal to a great extent or kill an animal. It's not tripping over the cat. It's not, backing over the dog by accident. It's something that you're doing on purpose and that anyone would recognize as serious and very serious. And it's a good point to be made. And it's not. I mean, I don't think that anyone's objective is to, clap people into the hooskow for something that they didn't mean to do. But it is the objective to have a serious penalty for people who are frankly sadistic toward their animals.
It's a good way to put it, Dale.
Yep.
Representative Mock, do you agree with this kind of tiered approach?
Well, I look at this and I think that again, hats off to the people that put this together because one, this is an entire new section of law that is spelled out in a way that I think makes perfect sense. It was the problem we ran into 2 years ago, as we were modifying law that really needed a rewrite, and so I look at this and it's very clearly defined. The previous law, the way it is today, and the commissioner and the senator can correct me if I'm wrong, but it is a misdemeanor to do any one of those things today if you are found guilty.
You're right.
On first and subsequent offenses. So for us to take the cruelty measure and make that a felony, I mean, that again, I don't think anybody argues that the willful intent to seriously injure or kill an animal. The key word there is the willful. That would be an act of cruelty and worthy of a felony provision. The areas that we're talking about, neglect, abuse, and abandonment, again, that's already a misdemeanor. The commissioner laid out a very, and I don't think this has been said enough, it's not a simple process to be brought up on these charges. It doesn't happen often. No. And what we're talking about and what this bill says is if you are brought up on those charges, if you go through that process more than one time in a 5-year period, that you are eligible for a felony. And when I think of that, if you have been accused of a crime of that nature multiple times in a 5-year period, perhaps it is time to start looking at those penalties. And I know that when you compare all of that to cruelty, I mean, abandonment, neglect, and abuse, it sounds minor compared to cruelty. It's still an extreme and willful misconduct towards a living animal. And so I think the commissioner is right that it goes through a lot of processes. There are significant checks in the system that by the time a person is before a judge for the second or third time on these charges, they have done a significant deed to earn themselves in that spot.
Are these charges typically brought through local law enforcement? I mean, if you got a neighbor who sees somebody abusing whatever, what's the process typically? Is it through local police department?
You call the cops.
Yeah. You call the police, and they would come and investigate. They would also probably pull in a local vet to help them in their investigation, because you got to really look at, depending on what the situation is, what the allegation is, if it's adequate care, is it neglect, they're going to go through and they're going to determine if there's adequate things available for that animal, and then they're going to look at the condition of the animal. In livestock or in animal agriculture, first thing you do is you certainly do engage a vet, because they have to look at body condition score. They're going to look at the conditions of the animal and its surroundings. They're going to look at water, feed. They're going to be visiting with the owner of those livestock, and they're going to determine if there's some reason that there needs to be an intervention here, and if there needs to be charges filed. And I'll tell you that there's been very, very few cases there. Most of the time it's misconceptions from someone in the public, or maybe there's a neighbor that has a little bit of a problem with an individual. And if it continues to exist, where you have a complaint coming from one individual about another, just keep in mind, folks, and to the public, that you could actually be charged with harassment if you are going down that line and you continue to try to complain or file a complaint and make allegations that are unfounded against somebody. So there's a lot of backstops, safety protocols in place that protect people, but we do need to deal with the bad actors, because the bad actors cause us a lot of problems. In agriculture, every time we got one individual that's chewing on some straw, missing 3 front teeth, and throwing a baby pig across a farrowing barn, it paints a very bad picture of our industry, and we're not that way. So we need to deal with the bad actors when we have them, but quite frankly, we make sure we do thorough investigations and we protect animal agriculture, and we're working to support those that have valid concerns with companion animals, and this law offers that and provides guidance and makes sure that there is clarification on how you will go about in that procedure and seizure, and making sure that there's a due process in place to protect the person that the allegations are made of, but also to deal with the issue when there is a problem.
One of the things that came up at the hearing was there were people there who run animal shelters in Fargo and in Mandan, and they get a lot of calls from people saying, well, my neighbor's, something's going on with my neighbor's dog, something's going on with my neighbor's pet, and they don't realize that the Humane Society, their local shelter, does not have police power. They know the local shelter just says, well, I'm sorry, but if you want to make a complaint, you go to the police. That it's not very well known that that's what the procedure is.
And this bill here is completely different than the measure number 5. You know, where measure number 5 was just cats, dogs, and horses, if I remember right. And personally, I think that they were aiming at making sure that we'd never have a slaughtering plant again for a horse, is what I feel. And why waste, a product that we have out there? And I think that was a lot behind it. And a lot of people I talked to, we had measures on the ballot where people were from New York to put things on our ballots, you know. North Dakota's got a little more sense in some of these. Well, I won't go into that, Dale, because I really get myself in trouble.
Talk about inhumane treatment of an animal for horses that are actually let loose and then end up diseased, malnutrition, starvation, and how cruel is that to a horse when we could have a system in place.
We've been speaking this evening with Senator David O'Connell, former Democratic Senate leader and a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He is a co-sponsor of the anti-animal cruelty measure we've been speaking about. We have Agriculture Commissioner Doug Goehring, who's a Republican. He was one of the leaders in getting this measure drafted, and we have Representative Corey Mock, a Democrat from Grand Forks, who has been very involved in animal cruelty issues in the legislature, particularly 2 years ago when a bill failed, and that was what led, I think, to the initiated measure that subsequently failed.
Dale, we got a quick question. We got 3 minutes to our break here, just a brief flow of time, but we got a caller, Jim from Bismarck. He wanted to know if the law would include if you sportly or humanely shot your aged or deceased dog, or if your neighbor's dog came over and started chasing your cows and started messing with your crops, etc., can you shoot your neighbor's dog? So there's a question someone's got to answer. That's a valid question.
Actually, it's protected and it's outlined in the bill.
Okay.
You can protect life and property against an attack from another animal. Right. The other issue about destroying an animal in a humane way, if it's diseased, hurt, injured, yes, that's covered also in the bill. You can do that.
Okay, great. Jim, thanks for your question.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
One of the things that my former father-in-law, he's not with us anymore, but he was concerned about language in this bill, because one of his ways, he's a farmer, and one of the ways that he gets rid of feral cats is he shoots them. And he was wondering, oh, gee, would I, be guilty of a felony under the initiated measure because I depopulated the cats that were invaded my barn? And that was a legitimate point, I thought.
I know a number of people that do it with no names mentioned.
Well, yeah, of course.
You wouldn't be on the bill if you did it.
Triple S, shoot, shovel, shut up.
That's right. Hey, I like that.
That was the lead poisoning you were just referring to about at the bottom of the hour. So.
That's right. Yeah, some people might think we're being a little, lighthearted about it. This is not lighthearted about it, but at the same time, it's good. It's good common sense.
Yep.
And I know some of the people, and I got a couple of neighbors that are going to be asking a lot of questions on this because they're pretty protective of what's going on. And when you're in the livestock business, that's your living. You're not going to be. And I know I run into 2 instances when I was campaigning where there was 7 horses and about as big as the room we're in, and there was bare as this table. Yeah. But they weren't farmers. They were. They just wanted the horses, but they didn't have any hay and they didn't have any pasture.
Yeah, they were just some horse owners who didn't know what they were doing. Huh?
Yeah, I look at this bill and I feel pretty good going back home to my constituents. And in my district, I've got ranchers who live in town who have ranches just outside of Grand Forks, and in door knocking during the campaign, board members on the Humane Society. And when I can look at a piece of legislation like this, and I compliment those who put it together, if I go home and show them to this, I know that they're happy with it. It's a good piece of legislation. I applaud all those who've worked on it.
Outstanding.
Well, thanks for tuning in for another hour of the Legislature Today, live from Peacock Alley. Join us here every Monday through Thursday, 7 to 9 and 8 to 9 out in Tioga and in Fargo on 1100 The Flag and 1090 in Tioga. So thanks for joining us tonight. We'll be back with the soybean growers after the break.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No.